All right, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this open forum and global dialogue on WSIS+20 and the Sustainable Development Goals hosted by the European Commission. My name is Niels Berglund, and I'm a research associate at the EUI, where I'm also a project lead for the Global Initiative on the Future of the Internet. And as we've heard throughout these first days of the IGF, we're really at a critical milestone for the broader internet governance community, which is the 20-year review of the World Summit on the Information Society, WSIS+20. And as any important milestone, it's also an opportunity to really assess the progress that we've made so far and, of course, look forward as a global community to where we go from here. So in this session, we're trying to reflect a bit on how digital technologies can support the Sustainable Development Goals and explore whether we're successfully integrating or translating the WSIS action lines into concrete policy or progress towards these goals. We'll also try to hopefully identify some practical strategies and partnerships that can accelerate this alignment as we approach WSIS+20. But before we get to this, I want to just give you a little bit of context. So when the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015, the ITU created a tool in conjunction with the 10-year review of WSIS called the SDG WSIS Matrix. And this matrix really mapped out the action lines of the World Summit on the Information Society. So goals like access to information, capacity building, cybersecurity, e-environment, e-governance, and tried to show the linkages that each of these had with the 17th Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, same applies for the vice versa, showing where specific SDGs, like reduced inequalities, quality of education, or even clean water, all align with different WSIS action lines. And the implications of this alignment is really quite significant because effectively it indicates that digital technologies could directly accelerate every goal, from eradicating poverty and hunger to gender equality to building resilient infrastructure and climate action. So it really kind of frames digital transformation as a universal accelerator and also an enabler of development. And in the process makes quite a good argument for why and how these goals and their respective policy frameworks could and should be aligned. And in fact, in recent years, there's been a lot of research that supports this alignment. So from the UNDP and ITU themselves, they've estimated that digital technologies directly benefit 70% of SDG targets. And another global study that analyzed statistical associations between the ICT Development Index and the SDG Index has clearly found a very strong correlation between digitalization and overall SDG progress, and an even stronger correlation on economic development. And if you zoom in on specific indicators and goals, there's a lot of good examples of this. So for example, on SDG 1, no poverty, you see that broadband expansion directly correlates with lower poverty. Or for SDG 3 on good health and well-being, we see that indicators like universal health coverage is also strongly correlated with ICT development. Or with education, so SDG 4 on quality education, where we see that literacy and enrollment rates clearly show positive trends with higher ICT development index scores. But we also know that the alignment between these goals, policies, and outcomes is far from perfect, and this picture becomes a lot more nuanced when you look at certain other goals, like in the case of climate action or responsible consumption and production, for example. We've seen some persistent challenges like CO2 emissions and e-waste that also come along with digital transformation. And in other cases, indicators are more complex or harder to measure. So different levels and different approaches to digitalization also produce differing outcomes. And some digital policies, like internet shutdowns, for example, can also undermine that development. So clearly there are areas where we need to better understand how we can leverage digital technologies for specific SDG targets, but then there are also areas where we know that this alignment actually needs to be strengthened. And that brings us to these sort of overarching questions that I'd like to pose to our lovely panelists, but also to all of you in the room, which is first and foremost reflecting on past experiences like the WSIS SDG matrix. What have we learned about integrating digital technologies and SDGs, and where do we see opportunities for deeper alignment? Secondly, what specific actionable strategies can we collectively pursue to leverage digital technologies for advancing SDGs? And then thirdly, how can diverse stakeholders work together to towards meaningful progress on these SDGs? So we've got a full panel, a great set of 7 speakers with us. We have Ambassador Bitange Ndemo, the Kenyan ambassador to the Kingdom of Belgium and the European Union. Director Thibaut Kleiner, Director for Future Networks in DG Connect at the European Commission, Director Sook-Jung Dofel, who's the Director General at GIZ and a member of the IGF MAG, Mr. Curtis Lindqvist, the President and Chief Executive Officer at ICANN, Mr. Juan Carlos Lara, the Executive Director for Derechos Digitales, Dr. Joanna Coleja, the Assistant Professor of International Law and Executive Director of the Lotz Cyber Hub at the University of Lotz, and lastly, Opoyemi Ogundeji, the Program Manager for the Nigeria Youth SDGs Network. And I'll go in the order in which you're seated. So I'll start with you, Ambassador. You've personally spearheaded digital development projects over the course of many years. I wonder if you could share your reflections on some of these questions and share what you see as critical opportunities for deeper alignment between digitalizations and the SDGs.
Thank you so much. How many hours do I have?
I'll give you 5 minutes, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you, and it's good actually to reflect on this. Previously, before I became ambassador, I used to be in the Ministry of Communication, and basically started from zero. We started with infrastructure, then started making internet available to universities, to citizens, then went into capacity building, digital literacy programs. But now, from where I sit, I think this should have been done using a systems approach, where when we went for the infrastructure, we should have thought about how would the farmers use it, how would. Of course, we did with the universities because it was much easier to deal with. Data has been very critical element. The time we opened up Kenya and created Kenya Open Data, a lot of innovations came out of it. But again, data protection laws have come. I am thinking that if we were to repeat it again, is to use this systems approach. Especially now, as AI is coming, that we could effectively, in Africa, deal with the issues of SDG1 poverty by simply leveraging AI to teach farmers to know the predictability of rainfall, to give them data on the soils, give them information on what grows where and everything. But it is only techies who are talking about AI, and policymakers providing or talking about regulating AI and missing the opportunity. Looking back, a lot of productivity improvement has come along with the developments that we did, especially and using infrastructure. But it follows after. But it is not done concurrently as I would have liked. Going forward from now, I hope we could deal with this. We had a lot of problems when we were developing our contribution towards the SDGs in New York. Some of the policymakers thought that data can be provided by government. But now we have seen we can get data from various places. If we can begin to think system-wide and say we are going to do this going forward. Right now we are discussing about the risks of AI. The voices I think we should be hearing is, what are the benefits? What is it going to benefit the citizens? How can they use it to make certain things? Then others can be thinking about regulation. I'm saying this because one of the most disruptive thing that we did in Kenya was to allow mobile money. A lot of people refused, but we said, we don't have the regulations, but let's move forward and see what happens. It has become one of the most inclusive innovation ever because of the risks that we took. and brought it forward without regulatory regime. Have more? Go on. Let me stop. He's smiling.
No, that's perfect. I think we can come back to some of these points. But in the meantime, I'll move to Director Kleiner. So the EU has championed comprehensive digital strategies like the Global Gateway. When it comes to integrating digital policy and SDGs, what do you think has worked well, and what opportunities do you see to strengthen that alignment?
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity also to engage in this forum today. I think that for the EU, the SDGs are really a critical objective, and we see really the benefits from digital technologies for not only development, but for basically everything we do in economy and society these days. And we have this also inside the EU. We are developing our capabilities, but now our message is very much that we want this EU tech offer to be given internationally to our partners. And in that context, we've dedicated a lot of efforts also through our program, which is called the Global Gateway, to actually promote investments globally. We've already done something like 250 projects through the Global Gateway in this area, and there are very concrete benefits. A focus is, for instance, connectivity. Secure connectivity, we believe, is the bedrock of everything digital. And we have a lot of capabilities in the EU, so we want to do more there. But we've done a lot of projects, not only around 4G, 5G, also data centers is now a focus of attention. I mean, just a striking number was given is that the whole of Africa has as many data centers as Switzerland. Clearly, there is a lot of potential in Africa, and I think that in the EU, we actually have technology to build data centers, leading companies, and we want to do more in this area. In fact, we are contemplating the possibility of also having supercomputers invested in some African countries, and also in Latin America, very concrete projects there. I would also say, to be short, that some elements we are bringing as part of this EU tech offer are also leaning towards the general framework, because one of the lessons we learn also looking at the SDGs is that you need to have a holistic approach. You need also to work on the regulatory framework. You need to make sure that the markets are competitive, because if you build a network but then there is a monopoly, it means that it's too expensive to just buy connectivity. And we have very concrete examples in some African countries where we help build the networks, but people are not using it because it's too expensive. And that's why you need also to have this approach where, you know, regulation, investment, and investing in people is brought together. And that's very much our message from the EU. We work in partnership. What we do is that we try to build local capabilities. We want to invest into skills locally so that actually the countries that work with Europe, they can also acquire the technology we provide. It's very much open source, and that's very often also through open source software and solutions and through digital public infrastructures that we operate. This is for us the right formula, and we intend to do more in the coming period.
Thank you so much. I think this point about the holistic approach also nicely echoes the ambassador's comments, and I wonder if maybe later we can also reflect on how to integrate that directly into the WSIS+20 process and what that means for the recommendations that we can come away from here. Mindful of gender balance also, I want to move to the other side of the table and move to Director Dofel from GIZ. GIZ has experience implementing digital development programs in a lot of diverse contexts. And from your perspective, maybe you can share a bit on the lessons and critical opportunities that you see on aligning digital transformation with sustainable development, also with the view to WSIS+20.
Yes, thank you. I mean, when we talk about WSIS, I suggest we don't ask what have you said, but rather what have you shifted? Because the impact of WSIS is not measured in declarations, but it's measured in moments. Moments when, for instance, as Doreen Bogdan-Martin yesterday said in her opening speech, a farmer receives an early flood warning by SMS, or when a midwife in rural Ethiopia learns to diagnose complications via WhatsApp, or even when a youth organization in Nepal builds its own open source mental health app. And these moments exist, and we should acknowledge it. And we should also celebrate, for instance, tonight at music nights. And tomorrow in the morning, we get up and we continue working, because we also know that still 1 in 3 people globally remain offline. We also know that in sub-Saharan Africa, 34% of women don't use internet. And we see a clear decline in official development assistance that is at the moment of 3% that goes toward digitalization. So what does that tell us? That principles have not yet become practice at scale. At GIZ, we are not a tech company, we are not a regulator, we are Germany's own development agency. And from where we stand on the ground in 120 countries, 4 things we have learned from aligning WSIS to the SDGs. First, capacity and code. Infrastructure matters, but digital access without local capacity creates dependency and not empowerment. Second, from global talk to local impact, because global debates often miss local complexity. At WSIS, we discuss data governance, for instance, but the issue in some countries is how do we protect people's data when there is no data protection authority? We need better translation between global norms and on-the-ground realities. Third, measure what matters and design what delivers. We need a very strong linkage between the SDGs and the digital transformation, in particular with smart indicators and mutual accountability. And of course, we have to design solutions that also achieve or help us to achieve the SDGs. And fourth, last but not least, mobilize investment for digital public good. Because I mean, the SDI for SDG roadmaps offer a very good entry, but still we need very specific financing mechanisms that combine development fund, private capital, and also local budget. And as for now, digital public goods are still underfunded and undervalued. So development cooperation plays a vital role in achieving the SDGs by strengthening local capacities or supporting the local ecosystems, and of course translating global frameworks into context-sensitive solutions. And if we are serious about turning this vision into practice, we also need strong and inclusive platforms for dialogue and coordination. And I know that there are different views on the digital governance questions, with ideas ranging across a spectrum from strengthening the IGF to creating a digital governance council, all the way to more formal institutional anchoring within the UN system. But please let me briefly recap what we recognize as fundamental and why the IGF remains so crucial to us. Global internet, global rooms. No one governs the internet alone. We also think that governance has to mirror the internet's architecture, so decentralized by design. We think that complex problems need collective power, collective diverse perspectives, and collective diverse perspectives create innovation, and innovative solutions accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. We also think that we should level the playing field. Empowerment grows from inclusion, and inclusion drives sustainability. Leaving no one behind also means leaving no one offline. So in short, as Curtis noted in his opening speech yesterday, the model works. We need to resource it. we need to trust it and use it. And I think that WSIS offered a promise to build a people-centered, inclusive, and development-oriented information society. The SDGs gave us a deadline. And the people we serve, be it the farmer in Colombia, the midwife in rural Ethiopia, or the youth organization in Nepal, and many, many more, remind us that digital transformation is about life changed. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Dofel, for these very structured feedback comments. I really appreciate it. And you harken back to another comment that we heard from the WSIS co-facilitators this morning, which is that the WSIS process belongs to all of us with that call to action. I'll pass the floor now to maybe Mr. Lindqvist from ICANN. Could I ask you to reflect a bit on these questions from the technical community perspective and maybe what you see as the priorities to ensure that digital transformation can meaningfully advance the SDGs?
Thank you. So I think there's one first important thing to do is we often talk about what we haven't done, but we should also reflect on what we actually have done, right? As my fellow panelists alluded to. And I think that's also important to not just look at it. Obviously, we need to do look at what we can do better, but we also have a remarkable success story behind us. And as we go to we approach the WSIS+20 review and the progress on the SDGs comes into focus on that as well, and as well as the action lines. I think that we have achieved a lot on this, and I think as I was quoted from yesterday, the model does work. I think it's important to recognize that, and that's what has actually delivered over the years. And the WSIS+20 review and the SDG reflection is really this reflection on the model that we have had this global coordination, not centralization. The multi-stakeholder model has delivered on the SDGs, and we have fulfilled a lot of these. We have seen a phenomenal, remarkable growth in these years, and the internet has contributed to a quite remarkable economic growth. That doesn't mean that everyone has seen the growth, and we have more to do. We're not done yet, right? But I also think we shouldn't say that we haven't achieved anything. We have, yes, it gave us a deadline, and maybe we have still a bit to go, but we have delivered a phenomenal growth in this. And I think if you look at some of the respects from the technical community is also, what has delivered in this. Look at IXPs in Africa, which is the glue that makes the internet work. If you want, we have seen this. The first 10 years we saw this double, and the last 2 years, 2-3 years, we've seen an explosion of this in Africa, helping to bring down costs, increase resilience, increase the robustness of the network, and we've seen network being built out in a phenomenal speed in Africa, trying to reach the remaining non-users, if you want, and build it out. So I think, have we achieved 100% coverage? No, but we have delivered a lot. And I think the SDGs really helped focus on that. I think a lot of the goals has helped us measure and focus on that. But I also think that meaningful access is more than just about the connectivity. It's about trust, resilience, and multilingual reach. There are some of the other goals, actually, making it accessible. Having just a physical infrastructure isn't going to make it accessible. We already heard examples of what does it mean to deliver on this from I like the example with the WhatsApp and the midwife. There's all these things that we are delivering, the digital payments in Kenya. And to deliver on this, we also need to have a resilient working infrastructure. Again, we have seen the number of DNS root servers, which is a very technical component, gone from a handful in 20 years to 2,000 globally today, where most countries on the earth has many of these to ensure this redundancy and resilience. And we have seen a lot of work being done in the multilingual internet. So we have worked on what's called universal acceptance to make applications, websites, web addresses accessible in many scripts and languages, which I think is another very fundamental part we often forget about. That my native language is in English, right? My native script is kind of Latin, but not completely, and we forget about this, that we also need to make it accessible. The farmers we heard about getting the weather update in AI, they should also have accessibility to this. There's more to it than just the concept, right? And I think that's something we need to do a lot more work on, and that wasn't one of your examples, but I think that's one of the other SDGs is actually making it accessible. So I think there's a lot of work on this that has been done. There's a lot more work to be done. And the technical community has a very important role to play in this, to deliver on the promise of the technology and make sure that the standardization, the technical aspects of this delivers on the promise of the internet that we just heard about.
Thank you so much. Moving down the line, I want to pass it right away to Juan Carlos Lara from Derechos Digitales. You're a member of civil society that's actively contributing to the WSIS+20 process. What do you see as the key priorities to strengthen this alignment between digital transformation and SDGs? And how do we also ensure that this is inclusive and rights-respecting in a way that also promotes transparency and accountability?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation as well. I come from Derechos Digitales, a civil society organization working in Latin America in all things human rights and digital technologies, but also as part of several coalitions that have gone to work on the WSIS+20 review process, which include the Global Digital Justice Forum, the Global Digital Rights Coalition for WSIS, and the Global South Alliance, amongst many other groups. I think most important in all of this is considering the perspective that we have as Global South organizations and Latin American organizations, in which we understand that the SDGs are not something that can be held by technologies, but commonly are. But the questions that we have to ask ourselves, the task that we have to go into is how to make that so-called digital transformation align with those SDGs in ways that are inclusive, accountable, in ways that are enforceable, effective in essence. And many of the things that we are concerned with today have been part of the discussion on WSIS during this IGF, especially picking up on the language that we have seen throughout this process from the several consultations and also from the elements paper that we've seen on WSIS and many of the discussions that we're having these days and this week. But I want to highlight 5 key aspects that we see as highly relevant for this question on in how we make sure that these approaches for WSIS can also be inclusive, transparent, accountable, and promote those values. And many of these can be seen in the action that has been requested by civil society globally from the WSIS process. One has to do with the embedding of rights and obligations at the center of SDG-related strategies. Much of the current WSIS discussion and the language in the elements paper tends to reaffirm soft principles and not necessarily clear obligations or clear reference to human rights instruments in ways that are sometimes baffling in how they might be interpreted towards the future when we require that basis, that common knowledge and that common basis of international human rights law as the basis for any kind of developmental process. As we see it, digital cooperation must uphold instruments like those in international human rights law, explicitly aligned with those frameworks, including the UNGPs, but also picking up on economic, social, cultural, environmental rights, and including clear obligations for state action, corporate due diligence as well, access to remedy, and transparency standards. Second, it's important to integrate digital policies in the national SDG implementation frameworks. This happens here and there. It's not something that happens at every level. One of the issues that we have found in many countries, including in Latin America, is the fact that if there is not enough reorientation in these processes towards co-creation and we see more top-down diagnostics, those processes can become something that is not inclusive as they should. Third, it's relevant to recognize that inclusive governance requires some degree of joint capacity to make decisions, to redistribute power. And much of the WSIS discussion has been on the weak language that recognizes multi-stakeholder approaches for decision-making and the value of the IGF. And it's highly important that for any kind of future process, not just on agreeing on language, but implementing and taking things forward at the national level and as well as the global level, we need to have stronger participation. That requires permanent representation in national digital councils and independent oversight bodies, real capacity to influence the shaping of policy and approve frameworks for implementation and funding and more. And this is something that, at least in Latin America, has been highlighted in general with public policy making processes, and we need to pick that up for this process that's embedded here with relation to WSIS. Fourth, it's key to have mandates on transparency and accountability mechanisms as a baseline, which is not something that's common to every country, but digital development plans must include public indicators, accessible audits, participatory review, which can apply both to states and corporations, and avoid vague corporate accountability language, but instead move towards a culture of global accountability. And fifth, this is something that's been part of very specific demands from the Global South community, is address the fiscal justice dimension of these issues. Much of this work requires funding. Sustainable digital cooperation requires public investment, and ad hoc funding may not do that or provide that in a sustainable way. So to link the financing for development process to acknowledge the need for cross-border fiscal measures is also relevant here, including equitable taxation of digital services and other ways to generate resources for digital infrastructure to provide for that sustainability in the services that we value in this space. So as we have said in many cases, digital justice requires fiscal justice, especially from cross-national services and transnational corporations, especially for regions where underinvestment tracks historical inequities as well. So these are opportunities that we see as more than theoretical. We have an opportunity to try and influence some international language and commitments, but we also wish to see those commitments then also happen at the national level, and therefore one of the most important opportunities that we have is not just influence at the global level, but also engage in discussions that allow us to bring these discussions back home and influence at the local level too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. I think in your overview, your intervention also points to some ideas for addressing the gap between global norms and implementation that Director Dofel mentioned, and also some issues that she raised, which kind of segues nicely to Dr. Joanna Coleja. You've published research on the future of the internet and sustainable development. You've also worked a lot on international law. I wonder if you could reflect on this research in the context of this alignment that we're discussing, and discuss a bit maybe what we've learned about aligning secure and rights-based internet governance with these SDG processes, particularly looking to WSIS+20, if you have time for all that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Niels. I think it's a 90 minutes lecture we're looking at here, but I'll try to squeeze it into 5 minutes. Please let me start by thanking Niels and his team for this opportunity. Indeed, I've had the pleasure of working with Niels and the EUI team on substantiating how we can use international law to support sustainable development, particularly in the digital era. As Niels kindly mentioned, there is a report that specifies this, but for the purpose of time, please allow me to make 3 points. We have mentioned the work done in the EU, naturally, with European Commission hosting this session. We have talked about international developments. My job has been to try and identify multiple documents that support the thesis that international law requires sustainable development. One of the areas that Niels and his team have been working on is the Declaration on the Future of the Internet. I don't think we've mentioned this here yet, but that is indeed a very specific plan on how to weave sustainable development goals into national policies and beyond. We have looked at work done in the UN. Again, in this session, we have not yet mentioned the Global Digital Compact. I know that during our week of meetings here, the Global Digital Compact will once again be on the agenda, but it has been a vital discussion to better understand why the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance is so important for sustainable development. ICANN pioneers the multi-stakeholder model. It champions both the outcomes, the policy development processes, and the metrics behind them, but we definitely need more. Hence, the Global Digital Compact would be one of the examples. Niels requested specific examples. How do we do this? Where do we facilitate the input? And in the paper, you will find a longer narrative around how the Global Digital Compact has been one of the tools to help us convince the unconvinced, if there are any, that sustainable development is indeed required. Then I'm going to move to more specific examples. One of the regions we've looked at in the report are the small island states. The colleagues, the co-panelists, have mentioned developments in Africa, and that is a vital region. There is a lot of support also within European policies with the Global Gateway facilitating development in that vital region. And it seems as if equal input into the Pacific region and small island states would be needed. I know ICANN is doing a lot of work in terms of technical support and capacity building. That is the example we have used for the purpose of the report. And then last but not least, I was pleased to hear the notion of connectivity. And it is fundamental to ensure that connectivity increases, but it is also recommended for that connectivity to be informed and once again sustainable. We would be looking at new internet infrastructures. One of the areas we've explored would be satellite broadband. There is a project that has been kindly supported by the Internet Society Foundation, and there's a lot of work that the Internet Society has done on those new internet infrastructures. Just like AI, they are coming into new regions, and haste sometimes precludes an informed policy making. So the recommendations you will find in the report would include the need for informed decision making, both with regards to policy, but also with regards to civil society consultations. Both researchers and NGOs, as my co-panelists have indicated, do have input to provide to make sure that whatever policy decisions are being made, they are rooted in international law, they reflect the multi-stakeholder model for policy development and decision making, and they do ensure sustainable development. One last component I'd like to mention within the 30 seconds remaining, I would focus on metrics, and you will find this in the report as well. If we want to make sure that we're achieving the goals, I believe this was mentioned by the director Dofel also as well, mentioning that we need to be able to measure the progress we're making. And again, my experience with ICANN is that the metrics are always high on the agenda, and that is something that is a lesson we can carry forward. I'm going to stop here. Once again, thank you for inviting me to join the panel.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Of course, you can find this report on our website, but you're also welcome to come speak to me after the event, and I'll make sure that you have a copy. Last but certainly not least, Opeyemi Ogundeji. I know that your organization is working on a voluntary national review of the Sustainable Development Goals in Nigeria. So I thought maybe you could reflect also on your local context and what you see as the critical opportunities for aligning and leveraging digital technologies for advancing the SDGs.
All right. Thank you so much, Niels, and the EUI for inviting us for this forum. And once again, my name is Opeyemi Ogundeji, and I'm the Programs Manager of the Network of Youth for Sustainable Initiative. We're a youth organization in Nigeria, basically advocating for meaningful youth engagement in programs and policies that enable them to lead and thrive. And for the past 8 years, we've actually been working at the grassroots level, ensuring that young people are meaningfully engaged, and they are also contributing to advancing the SDGs. And in relating to the question Niels asked me, I would be speaking on 3 points actually as the opportunities we believe that can be leveraged on. And the first one I will speak about is decentralizing policy processes in using digital platforms. We've actually been able to identify these in one of our projects, which we actually worked on, named Empowering Civil Society to build stronger communities in Nigeria, especially in advancing the Nigeria's climate policies, which are the National Adaptation Plan and the Nationally Determined Contribution. What we noticed is that most time when policies are being made, the top to down approach are actually being made use of, and people who are at the local level who could actually take actions or actually advance these policies in order to ensure that we have more resilient communities that are not really informed. And rather than making use of the top to down approach, why not make use of the bottom to top approach? And that was what we actually kind of like work with, where we decentralize this climate policies to enable people at the grassroots level who could actually take actions to get to know more about these policies, and also to have positive dialogues, consultations, and engagements using the digital tools and resources in order to gather what community-based needs for adaptation actually are for them, in order for them to basically develop their own local adaptation plan of action for each of the states. And also the next point I also want to make mention of is improving affordability and accessibility through needs-based digital services subsidization. Earlier this year in Nigeria, right, data tariffs were actually increased, and for a country where most of the people are actually, what they prioritize most is what to, how to live, basically meet their daily needs, which are basically food, getting shelter, and increasing that data tariff does not in any way as well help them to, have the access to digital services and digital tools that we're actually looking forward to expanding its reach in advancing the SDGs. And why young people or people at the local levels actually understand that accessing digital resources or being on digital, being accessible to digital technologies could help them gain more global opportunities and, access more better opportunities to improve their livelihoods, and or they would rather actually go for, meeting their basic needs rather than, subscribing to data or looking for internet connectivity to access all of these opportunities or even get access to quality education. And in that sense, what it means is that why don't we make use of, digital needs-based subsidization model whereby, people who really need this, who really have needs for this, should be given access and be enabled to afford these resources in order to advance the SDGs. And by doing so, what we're saying is that we are contributing to the SDGs that talks about reducing inequalities, quality education, and even innovation as well. And last but not the least, the last point I was going to talk about also is digital capacity building across sectors. Most times the private sectors work in such a way that even when you want to get hired or recruited, the first point is most time they ask you, do you know how to use MS tools? Can you use basic digital tools and services? But it is not really most times, seen in the public sector, whereby the workforce at times when we want to engage as a youth organization now, I'm speaking from the point of view of a youth organization, when we reach out for partnerships, speaking on SDG 17, Partnership for Goals, we have to go through several bureaucratic steps and processes, which we could have basically limit all of the processes by engaging digitally. But the issue is the workforce, a little number of them actually have access or know how to make use of these digital resources. And in that sense, we are asked to submit physical letters, meet physically, and as opposed to their counterparts where you can just exchange emails, get quick responses, and move ahead when it comes to, partnering for goals and advancing the SDGs. So what this means is that while the private sector is advancing in improving the capacity of its workforce, having access to digital tools and services, we should also look at the public sector as well. The workforce, we're speaking of the school teachers, we're speaking of people working in the health sector. Let them have access, to quality capacity building session, which could actually improve their work and also advance the SDGs. Citing a personal experience now, using the health sector, as a young person in Nigeria, I would rather actually go to the private, for private healthcare, because I know I'm not going to have a need to follow a long queue due to, which I will actually experience in the public sector where there are so many files having to be carried around. But in the private sector, they can easily take your data, enter it on the, on the digital tools or make use of laptop, and you have quick access to healthcare. And, it's not really that evident in most of the public hospitals and healthcare services. So this means what this is saying is that basically this is a core opportunity for us to ensure that while private sector is growing, we also need to look at the public sector as well, so that there is this capacity building across the sectors, and every sector is actually receiving the quality attention it needs to get. So in summary, and I'll be concluding by saying that advancing the SDGs in Nigeria through digital technologies requires a deliberate focus on inclusive access, decentralized participation, and cross-sector capacity building. If we are truly committed to leaving no one behind, then digital inclusion must be treated not as a luxury, but as a foundational enabler for achieving the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Opeyemi, for this a very concrete and also local example. I'm going to open the floor now, so if anyone is interested in making a question or a comment, you can line up here on the side. You can also flag or indicate your willingness to speak online, where we have an online moderator that will communicate that to me. But in the meantime, maybe, Opeyemi, I'll start by asking you a follow-up question, just briefly. Your organization works with, I think it's over 1,000 volunteers, you told me yesterday. What do you see the role of youth in strengthening the development outcomes of digital technologies?
All right, thank you so much. So we work with young people, and we actually have a large community. You can check us out online, NG Youth SDGs. And while working with youth, we know that young people, particularly young Nigerians, are actually very enthusiastic about the SDGs. And from time to time, you're always seeing a young change maker standing up to say, oh, I advocate for SDG 4, I advocate for SDG 6, because they are really enthusiastic about just making things work and building the community they really desire to to see and actually even have their children to take over from. So for young people in Nigeria, I'm speaking for young people in Nigeria now, what we are looking forward to is that our voices are actually really heard and listened to, and we're actually giving the accurate support, in terms of technical assistance. We make use of a model in our work, right, where, we work with young people who are very enthusiastic about the work in the local community using the trainer model, where we actually empower them, and then they go into their local communities to empower so many other persons, and that's more like a multiplier effect. So young people are so interested in this, but then we need to actually create that room for them to be able to sit in when it comes to decision-making processes, when it comes to conversations that actually meant for them, so that they also can actually make their voices count. And also, when they do it, when they are raising their voices, and that's why the issue of rights comes in, because most time when young people say, this is not working, this is not being done, before you know it, the voices of that young person is being silent, that, oh no, you don't know what you're saying, and all. So we need to give them that room. And when they do that, we also need to spotlight them, because these people are actually very enthusiastic and eager to make something work.
All right, thank you so much. We have our first question. Please go ahead. Introduce yourself, your name and your organization also, please. Thank you. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, yeah. Sorry, my name is Abdul Karim. I'm a professor of wireless telecommunications from the University of Ilorin in Nigeria. I have two questions, and the first one is to His Excellency from Kenya. And my question is, today is an important day in Kenya. So my question is around WSIS, SDG, and how important today is in Kenya, because the government of Kenya, how do you reconcile its international commitment to digital rights and inclusion, especially inclusive governance, with the recent domestic response to youth-led civic movement, especially in the light of today being an important day in Kenya, that especially around concerns on digital access and police accountability. Then the other one is to the CEO of ICANN. I know ICANN has positioned itself as a cornerstone of global multi-stakeholder model, accountable not only to single government, but to the broader internet community. Yet recent edits to remove reference to inclusivity from ICANN's public communication appears to reflect ideological stance on a single national administration rather than the global agreed principle. At this time when WSIS+20 plus calls for reaffirming inclusive digital development and SDG emphasizing leaving no one behind, how does ICANN justify these changes, and what safeguard exists to prevent political interference from undermining the global and inclusive character on internet governance? Thank you.
All right, let's take the second question, and then we'll move back to the panel.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Jimson Olufuye, a principal consultant, contemporary consulting, and the chair of the Advisory Council of Africa City Alliance, based in Abuja, Nigeria. I have a comment and two questions. But let me really commend my darling sister, Deopemi, for the great job you're doing. Well done. We appreciate what you're doing. And to comment that perhaps looking at WSIS+20 and SDG, we may need to dig deeper at the grassroots. Okay, out of WSIS we have IGF and other action lines. Maybe we can deepen the discussion at the sub-national level, at the local level. Okay, maybe state level, local government level, to really bring in more people into the discussion. And then the question: do we have anybody from SDG on the table? SDG office specifically? I know in some countries we have SDG offices, but we don't usually, mobilize them to be part of the discussion. So is it a good thing to mobilize the SDG offices to be part of the discussion? And the question again, the last one, yes, to ICANN president. Yes, we've been talking about sustainable funding for IGF, which is part of WSIS really. What is ICANN doing? We have this auction proceed, fund, and there's interest coming out of it every year. Okay, that interest, well, is it not possible to have a small percentage of it dedicated to IGF funding? Thank you.
All right, so a handful of questions there. Maybe we'll take them in order. So we'll start with you, Ambassador.
If I understood the question on Kenya correctly, the question is about the youth and access to internet, or youth and...
I think also what Kenya is doing more generally on digitalization and SDGs.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. Internet penetration in Kenya is very high. I think it's about 80%. Because of it, a lot of young people are doing a lot of online jobs and other things. Kenya is perhaps one of the countries in Africa that, in spite of the unrest by the youth, internet remains open. Because of high unemployment, we have had a bit of challenges with the youth, but internet in Kenya has never gone down because of the unrest. And the number of jobs in this space, I said earlier that Kenya has witnessed huge productivity improvement just due to use of ICT. A lot of resources are coming into Kenya because resources towards supporting startups. Actually, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria are the leading. So I have no doubt that we would eventually find ways of settling the youth who are the majority now. Almost 70% is below 35. It's a huge challenge. And that's why we brought subsidies, especially university kids to use. We provided free internet to the Kenya National Research Network. We subsidized laptops and other tools that they needed, and we are continuing to do that to see that we create enough employment for the young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Sure, please go ahead, Mr. Lindqvist.
Thank you. So I think I had, there was two questions. The first one was about, there are some reports about a change in policy on ICANN. Unfortunately, a lot of this reporting isn't really quite correct. So let me frame what happened is that we have 2 pages on our website. One relates to employment at ICANN. That is a consolidation of representation of our employment practices across all the jurisdictions where we have employees. And as for any multinational corporation with multiple employees, we update these policies to reflect changes in employment law and employment structures. We have always had a commitment to equal employment opportunities, and we're deeply committed to having a continue this. That hasn't changed. Nothing has changed to this. There were some updated what's called recommendations, employment legislation in the US. We reflected that in the page. That hasn't changed the policy. It has to do with the wording that you're using around this, and we reflected that change. That was all that website was. All community policies and the commitments we have made are the same. They have not changed. We haven't changed anything regarding to this. They are developed by the community, for and by the community. We remain committed to those. So I think that's unfortunately a little bit of a representation by a blogger that was slightly taken out of context. But that's the answer to the first question. The second question on what we do, ICANN is one of the largest donors to the IGF, so we do already contribute significantly to the IGF as to the donations to this. The auction proceeds are guided by a community-developed policy of how we use these community proceeds, and there are discussions in the community on how this proceeds. If this current policy as set by the community is the right or should be different. I know that it has been raised with the IGF a few times. That's a policy process inside ICANN to decide what we do with this, and that might well be that the community have different opinions on how or when we could use this, but at the time being, that is the policy we have for how that's being used. So, again, we are very committed to ICANN, and we are committed to ICANN to IGF, and we are will continue to be the donations we do as to see IGF be a sustainable venue for further dialogue.
Thank you so much. We have one question from online, from the floor, from Emmy from the Ugandan IGF. She asks, how can WSIS+20 process better support Global South in developing digital strategies aligned with the SDGs, given the disparities in digital infrastructure and governance capacity? And we have only 5 minutes left, and I want to give you all a chance for kind of a closing word. So maybe let me also put my own spin on this question and add to it and ask you all to maybe highlight one priority action or recommendation that we take looking forward to WSIS+20. Maybe I'll start in the order. So I'll give you 1 minute if you can keep it at that, Ambassador, and then pass you to Director Kleiner.
Thank you. I think what we should do in the Global South is for governments to avoid taxation, which actually makes the cost of accessing internet too high. That we should begin to do that first before we look elsewhere. Second, we have to subsidize university and other tools that we require. This is the most consequential period ever with the emerging tech, that we can completely bring a lot of productivity improvement in Africa, especially what I said earlier with respect to AI. We must take risks. It is risks that pay more. I know most people say, no, we need to be careful on this, but we have to take risk, especially in AI, and move with it, develop local LLMs, and that's how we can begin to move forward. Thank you.
I think as the discussion highlighted today, I mean, the SDGs are covering a lot of ground. So I think that if we want to be impactful, we need also to have priorities. But we also need to make sure that it's not just about investment, it's also about the conditions for delivering. So to me, I mean, the first thing we need to do is really to complete the connectivity, and we need to map where things are missing. This is what the EU is doing currently. And we want to execute these projects of investment in telecommunication networks, submarine cables, and combine these precisely with the legal framework that will give access to everyone.
I think looking ahead, the task ahead of us is quite clear, right? The internet's future, stability, accessibility, and potential depends very much on the technical coordination being stable, that it works across borders, across sectors, and across languages. And I think someone in the beginning said this, that the current value of the internet is that it's non-fragmented, it's a unique, global, reachable, accessible, ubiquitous network. And this is really a foundational principle to enable everything else we talked about here today. And unless we safeguard that and protect that in the context of the WSIS and any other future discussions going forward, that's at risk, right? And I think the internet's future and the cooperation, everything we talked about here is actually to understand these foundational principles. And that is what's going to deliver very much what we talked about here today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to build on Ambassador's demo contribution. I do agree we should take risks, but my one message would be for those risks to be calculated. So I'm going to argue for informed policy making, research-based decision making. Just because the new technology is there, it doesn't mean it should be instantly allowed and used by the people. And that's what the SDGs are there for, to keep us safe from those who might wish to benefit from our unawareness. I'm going to conclude it here. Thank you again.
Yes, +1 to that last point, and very much in support of evidence-based for decision made. But at the same time, highly relevant is participation, and for that, aside from meaningful connectivity being supported, and not just think of things as services to be provided, but also networks to be built, we also do need improved local participation. I will always emphasize that, but for this process, it's important to maintain and to uphold sustainable commitments for participation, especially from global majority countries, both for resources for in-person attendance as well as for meaningful remote participation for those who decide not to make the travel. But that's a highly important point, of course, to take notes.
To drive SDG impact, digital strategies and roadmaps must be embedded in local realities, shaped through inclusive partnerships and backed by long-term ecosystem thinking, globally and locally. That's why the IGF at global, regional and local level matters more than ever. And this is what I have to say, of course, as MAC member.
All right, so what I'm going to say is that as we look ahead, one core thing we should look at is ensuring that there is capacity building across sector. As private is growing, the public should be growing. Like every sector should actually be growing alongside. And also the second part also is that we need to recognize that youth voices are actually very, very key and very important, and their voices should be amplified when it comes to decision-making processes because they are basically the future. And also, lastly, what I would say is that people at the local level also need to be considered, and whatever intervention we are giving, we should actually put them in mind and target them as well, just so that they receive the adequate support that they need.
Thank you so much. So I will close by just sharing that on Friday, the 20th of June, the co-facilitators of WSIS have shared an elements paper, which also calls for feedback on a range of areas, including ICT for development. And you're able to submit those contributions until the 15th of July. So if anyone is interested in contributing, I encourage you to do that. Now, help me give them all a round of applause.